Welcome, Legionnaires, to the Long Live the Legion podcast, where we talk about the Legion of Superheroes comic book team and break subjects down so that whether you're just out of the Legion Academy or you're a longtime veteran with your own flight ring, you get to know the team a little bit better. I'm your co-host, Jim.
And I'm your co-host, Jay.
What do we have on the mission monitor board for today, Jay?
So we've got a very special episode. So first, the focus of this episode is we're going to talk about the second Paul Levitz run in the Legion of Superheroes comics, so volume 2. So basically issue 284. And I think we're going to go all the way to the end of Tales of the Legion. Does that sound right, Jim?
Sure.
Yeah, because we don't want to talk about that on any other episode. So that's going to be to issue 325. And we have a very, very special guest today. He is an award-winning author. He is a longtime DC Comics employee and writer. It's a thrill for us. We have Alex Segura.
Well, thanks, guys. Like I said, long-time listener, first-time guest. Good to be here.
Absolutely. No, thanks for joining us on this fun episode, because we know that you're a big Paul Levitz fan and big Legion fan. As a writer, we'd love to hear the opinions of folks who actually are in the business, especially when we're talking about such a iconic time of the Legion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've known Paul a long time, like we were saying before we started recording. When I first got the job at DC, I think around 2006, the holiday season before, I think the December before, I interviewed. And at the end of this barrage of interviews, someone said, okay, now we're going to take you to meet Paul Levitz. And I was like, wait a second, the Paul, I knew Paul was the president and publisher at the time. I was nervous, but he was very calm and just like talking about like life things and like moving to New York. And, it was very like friendly and welcoming. And it really put me at ease. And, over the years, we've ended up becoming really good friends, and I admire Paul a great deal. He was very helpful with my novel, Secret Identity, which was a murder mystery set in comics in the 70s, a period where I was not alive and Paul was in the business. So he was very helpful with like historical accuracy and things like that. Creatively, I just think Paul is the master plotter when it comes to team books. Like he's got this way of passing the baton where you don't feel like any character is getting short shrift. And that's really hard to do with a team like the Legion, where you've got 20, 25 active members, subplots. And I wasn't surprised when I heard, I think it was on a podcast or an interview, that he had a method, like a literal method. I think Denny O'Neil mentions it in that guide to writing DC Comics. I forget what he calls it, the Levitz corollary or the Levitz formula, but it's basically a spreadsheet where you have the A plot, and the A plot runs for X amount of time. Once the A plot is resolved, the B plot that you've been simmering for X amount of issues becomes the A plot, and so on and so forth. This sounds super algebraic, and I am not a math person in any way, but it works really well. And I can't say I've used that, but I definitely use some form of that with long form comics. Like I just finished up a long run on Star Wars, and I definitely kept that in mind. Like, okay, this is now the B plot is elevating to the A plot, and we're going to start tweaking it from there. But I think another strength of Paul's writing isn't just the mechanical stuff, it's the voices. Like you almost see the characters come to life, and this is no offense to the creative team before Paul's second run. I think it's more definite with the second run. The second that starts, everyone sounds different. And it's the Winnie the Pooh rule, which is every character has to sound so different that you know immediately who's talking. Will talks a certain way, Winnie the Pooh talks a certain way, Eeyore talks a certain way. And it's not just dialogue, it's alliances, loyalties, relationships. Like the way Shadowlass and Mon-El and Tinya and Joe were like the two couples that were friends, and they didn't like Timberwolf or Wildfire. There was drama bubbling under from the drop. For me, a longtime Claremont reader, X-Men reader, I love the soap opera so much more than the punching. Now, sometimes when I go back and read long runs, like I'm rereading the Gerber Defenders stuff, I will skim over the battle because I really just want to see them arguing. I want to see the characters like have beef and what's the drama, like what's the conflict, the personal, the romance. And I don't know if that's because I grew up an Archie reader, and that's not really soap opera, but it's like very much sitcom soap opera, like the romance and the interplay between the characters. So that's really the stuff that speaks to me. And Paul knows how to balance the action and the drama, and he knows the lore. Like you just can tell, and this is obviously very vague, but I could just tell he loved these characters. There was a passion there. And that goes all the way through the retro boot stuff as well. Like he's trying really hard to put these characters through their paces, but do it with care and understanding. And it never felt cheap. It never felt like, oh, he just pulled that out of his pocket and is just like throwing a grenade into things because he got bored. It always felt like earned. And I value that as a mystery writer. When you write a mystery, if you get to the last page and it's the butler from chapter 2 that you saw for half a page, I get mad as a reader. You have to leave enough clues that you feel like the reader can piece it together. And if they do, they're like, wow, that was a really cool mystery. I figured it out. Or they get to the end and they say, man, how did I miss that? All the clues were there. And Paul does that really great with Censor Girl. He's a craftsman. And I think, and I'll stop after this, but the thing I find most relatable to Paul is that we both work really hard, I feel. Like not a lot of it feels like innate skill. Like I don't roll out of bed and I'm a great writer. Like I have to, it's a craft. I have to keep doing it and get better. And I can't speak for Paul. I don't know if he says this, but I get the sense that he works hard at the craft, just knowing him as a person and just seeing it on the page.
Absolutely. I think you kind of nailed something there that I noticed when I was kind of reading through the stuff. I guess, how long ago was it, Jay? Several months ago, we did a spotlight on the Reflecto storyline, right? Which was a decent, like a year's worth of comics, basically.
Yeah.
That, and then just was kind of just prior and following that, they all had a very specific feel, which was, it was okay. But as soon as you open up issue 284, you can tell there's more going on. It's a full meal in front of you. And every issue after that is like that. And to your point about setting these things up from a murder mystery perspective, almost right off the jump, he's planting the seeds for lots of things.
Yeah.
The Vaira subplot that goes for like another year or two.
So good. Yeah.
All this stuff. And then of course it leads into the Great Darkness Saga. But yeah, it's this really dense material. And it's not a comic book. These aren't comic books that you can just kind of flip through. You have to pay attention. And you're rewarded when you actually do pay attention to these and take the time to really read and analyze what's going on in the panels.
Based on like what you said about it being a craft and not being like just something you just roll out of bed and do. I really think like when you get to issue 284, it is so much. And I'm guessing on this. I haven't seen Paul Levitz actually say it, but like he learned so many lessons from his first run in the 70s of what to do and what not to do and what worked. And I think it was a chaotic time when he was doing this. Like, to know DC history, and Alex, having talked to him, I'm sure you know way more than I do. And I think when he got this chance, you can tell he was in that, I'm going to do this the way I want to do it. I have to respect everything that's come before, but I have to move everybody in the right direction. And I think it was that lesson learned from, like, you think of every big time in the Legion, it's always when they throw out kind of what's happened before. So like Shooter comes in and basically says, this didn't work. I'm going to bring in the soap opera. I'm going to bring in the characters. So suddenly you have like Shadowlass wanting to date everybody, and you have like, it's just these different characters. And I think, we talk about the Reflecto, and Jim, you were very nice about this, because when we were doing that episode, it wasn't, this was okay. It was, this is garbage. And I'm like, no, this is my childhood. We love this.
Oh, man.
But I mean, think about like 284, that very first moment where like, the lone wolf Timberwolf, that's done. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. So in one issue, he's like, plastic surgery, you're now a different character. And boom, he makes that switch because he's like, this doesn't work.
One thing, and I'll stop mentioning Chris Claremont, that's a habit of mine on podcasts just because I'm a big fan, but I think one thing that Chris and Paul have in common is that they play well with others, with moving pieces. Okay, Jim Shooter says you have to bring Jean Grey back and make Madeline Pryor the Goblin Queen. He makes it work. Paul has to retcon Superboy out of the Legion lore. He makes it work. And that's a very unique thing to comics. In novels, you write your novel and it is what it is, and no one's going to tell you. I mean, your editor can probably tell you not to do something, but they can't say your character wouldn't do that, or this is changing now. We're pulling the rug out from under you. But I think also it's worth noting, I wasn't a Legion reader when I worked at DC. I read it for work. Like, I worked in the publicity department, and I think around that time, the Wade Kitson 3-boot was happening, the early stages of what would become the retro boot, or the Lightning Saga Legion was starting. Was happening. And I read Paul's Great Darkness Saga around that time just to get to know his work better. But I wasn't a Legion fan. It was only until very fairly, I would say in the last couple of years, that I just said, I'm going to get into the Legion now. And I told him, I was like, hey, I'm reading your stuff. I know this is a little weird. We've known each other like 15 odd years. And he was like, well, let me know as a mystery writer what you think of the Censor Girl stuff. And it's a well executed mystery. It's really, and the order I read the Legion stuff, though, was, I think you guys probably cringed when I told you, but I started with 5 years later, like literally started with number 1 and then went around, which I would not advise to anyone, but it was a blast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that takes guts doing that.
Yeah. Well, because they never say the code names like you guys know
Right.
as well as
Yeah.
yeah. I was like, oh, who's Rock and who's Imra and who are these people?
Yeah.
And a lot of research, but it was fun. It was really, it reminded me of reading comics as a kid when you don't know anything and you're just diving in.
Yeah, but without that, I'll make another Claremont reference since that's
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be the theme of the podcast. Well, without those great, I mean, like they read badly now because we're so used to the 6-issue whatever. But I always loved the first page or two of every Claremont X-Men book where it's like,
Yeah.
here's who everybody is, here's what's going on, like I'm bringing you up to speed, and yeah, like you really appreciate that he can work it into every book.
The purple prose, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, and
Or also just explaining what your powers are, like
yeah.
And just recapping so a new reader picking it up at the newsstand knows, oh, okay, this is who this character is. And both Paul and Chris write great female characters, very distinct voices, very empowered, and they don't feel one note. And this is not a criticism of anyone before Paul, but Dawnstar to me was very one note. But when Paul took over the book, he gave her purpose and gave her. I'm not a huge Dawnstar fan, but he at least made her feel unique and different, and she had a viewpoint. And you can say that for I think all the core Legionnaires at that point.
Yeah. And the relationships. I mean, I think the way that the Dawnstar Wildfire relationship is portrayed in the Levitz writing is much more profound, much more, dare say, realistic. I don't know if that's, if you can say that with these comic book characters, but it seems more true, I guess, is the better word to use.
Yeah, or Misa and Block. I think the challenge is picking between subtext and being overt. And I think Paul always made that right call, very much so in the second run. He didn't have to spell it out for you every time. And then later on, when you see other writers tackle it and they do try to spell it out, it almost deflates the dynamic. It's the moonlighting effect. Once they're together, the drama's gone. And so unless that's your intent to like marry them off and send them away, why not keep the wheel spinning as long as possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was the ultimate doomed romance that neither of them could talk about, and especially she would never talk about, right? And I think that was the other great twist on that is she was sort of I mean, this is going to sound like a crazy way, but like historically, she was the guy in the relationship, and it's Wildfire is the overly emotional girl going like, I want to be with this person, and she's just like, yeah, I just fly and I track people, and I've got this very stoic demeanor, but yeah. I mean, again, Dawnstar I think is another one where he learned his lessons because he created her in the first run.
Yeah.
And then she just kind of moved to the background, and I don't think anybody knew what to do with her. And then
she had this terrible habit of saying what her powers were and then not being able to do it. Like, I'm a great tracker, but I don't know where this person went.
Yes.
Well, speaking of that, so and we're going to have an episode specifically on episode 289 down the road, but that is a really good case in point, right? Where you have actually she does use her powers properly there.
Yes,
but then you also have this added drama where you have the whole White Lass and Timberwolf. Oh my god,
no worries.
The whole relationship there starts to break apart. And just lots of other dynamics going on just in that one issue, right? And it's just so good. And it just seemed to me that from the time that he starts these issues at 284, he takes a couple of them just to kind of move the pieces around on the playing board, right? To get people where he wants them to start. But then after that's there, you have the whole Kund invasion storyline. You have the the first annual, almost right out of the gate. One of the best comic books ever written, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you just jump right into the Great Darkness Saga. And it's an amazing first year of comic books. I mean, it's hard to believe that we were gifted this wonderful run. I mean, I'm gushing about
this. It's stunning that Great Darkness Saga is almost his first at bat. He just brings it out of there. And I think the point where I realized, okay, we're cooking with gas was that issue where it's Imra and Timberwolf and they're having this back and forth. And I'm like, is he going to go there? Like, is this happening? Is he really going to go there? And he does, but he does it in a very thoughtful and organic way. And he makes these characters messy. They're young, I guess early 20s, late teens. Yep. At this point, but our brains aren't even fully formed at that age. It's like, so you're going to make mistakes, you're going to make bad choices, and you're going to be angry and emotional. And I felt like that comes across so well in those early issues. And that for me is like what I love from teen books, the soap opera and the earned drama.
Right? Yeah, I think a lot of people have lost that, like the idea, like everybody sort of says soap opera as this negative, right? Like, oh, we don't want this soap opera. And I don't understand that. Like, there's a reason why soap operas are super popular and they're on TV. But even like like Friends isn't the popular show that it is without all the soap opera behind it. Like you need to care about the characters. Or the one that I like, it's kind of funny you mentioned before, like I don't care about the action, it's the drama that matters. Like I just rewatched Die Hard for oh God, I don't even know how many times. My son's covering it for a project in school, so he's like, can we watch this again? And so we're watching this, and that movie doesn't work if they don't have all of these slow moments where you know who the characters are and you understand that like the marriage is broken up. And then with every Die Hard movie after, they forgot that. And it's like, no, you need to have, or think about John Wick. Like the first John Wick works because you understand exactly why the dog's important and why he's doing this. And by the fourth one, it's just 2.5 hours of him shooting people. And you're like, no, we need to have a reason why he's doing this. Like, and I think that's what Levitz brought here is from the first issue. He's like, here's why they're doing this. Here's why this is important. So like all the little changes he's making, the people he's bringing back, like he kills off King. Okay, Vox. How do we want to pronounce Projector's dad?
I defer to you guys.
Right, and immediately like, yep, Karate Kid and Projector are getting married. Let's shove that forward. Let's go. And then Dr. Regulus comes back. Okay, Sunboy's here, and it's that organic. Look, he's actually a smart guy. Like he understands nuclear. He's a scientist, and we're just immediately elevating these characters. And then since we already sort of brought it up, Chameleon Boy responding to, "Hey, R.J. Brand's my dad."
Yeah.
And that leads into this story. And it's these characters, like you say, they're messy, they're making mistakes, they're emotional. But it's all moving these characters forward and elevating them. I don't think like Chameleon Boy, aside from when he was investigating Ultra Boy's murder, can you think of anything he really did in the 10 years? And then suddenly, nope, he's now like front and center. We have to deal with.
Yeah, and even that was so disjointed just because of editorial fiat and creative issues. I think the Levitz run, especially this section of it, is a testament to comics that don't really exist anymore in terms of like big two comics, because Paul had this runway. Paul and Keith had this long runway where they could set these subplots and tee things up and then pull them out and tie them into the ongoing thread. It's just nowadays, and it's not a criticism, it's just a market. It's, you get a miniseries, you get an arc, and that's your story. You're writing a little mini novel. But then the next creative team picks it up and they're not beholden to what you set up. I mean, they might pick up some characters and things like that, but they're also doing a fresh start. Whereas with this run, like the Claremont run or Wolfman on New Teen Titans or so many other books of that era, he had open road for X amount of years to really like go big, and build to these things. So they felt much more meaningful when they happened, as opposed to, like you said, Die Hard 2 or 3, where it's just fireworks without, if you don't care about the characters, it's just like, you're just watching a fireworks show.
So let me ask you this. So since you brought this up, and I this is something I wanted to get into, and we're going to eventually have to talk about this whole run and everything. But like, do you think like it is a product of the time? Like comics were just different in the 80s, and this all starts in 1982, and we're in a different world, right, compared to today. But do you also think that it's a part of where DC Comics was at in 1981, 1982, like where they're in huge financial trouble? They've almost either sold off or licensed out their biggest characters. The DC implosion was what, 4 years earlier, 3 years earlier?
Roughly, yeah.
And New Teen Titans is literally the only book that's selling for them. Right. So so is it part also DC just going, we got nothing to lose, so we're going to so for example, like Swamp Thing gets Alan Moore at about this time, right? And not to compare runs, but like, and Wolfman and Perez, they basically gave them the farm to take over New Teen Titans. Like I just read this recently. I had no idea Wolfman and Perez still had like licensing control over the new characters, or were making money off Cyborg and Starfire. Have you ever heard this before, or is this like internet garbage?
I mean, aside from like creator equity, I hadn't heard it.
Yeah. So I'd heard that. And then like with Levitz, they were just like, you know what? The sales have been dropping for a bit. Let's see what you can do. Go and have fun. Do you think there was a freedom there that maybe wouldn't have existed? Like it was sort of the perfect time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the closest example of that happening in recent history is like when Quesada and Gemis take over Marvel. And, Marvel as a company is reeling from bankruptcy, and they're like, okay, Grant Morrison, go nuts with the X-Men. Joe Quesada, Kevin Smith, do whatever you want to Daredevil, and then just really Marvel Knights go wild with these characters and really push the envelope. And I think there was probably some degree of that. Also knowing, Paul knows this lore, Paul knows this world. He's a company guy. He was working in house already. They probably weren't worried about him going completely off the rails, but they didn't worry about it, which is a great position to be in. You have a long stretch that you can run, and you also have the trust of your management. I mean, I can't speak for him. I wasn't there, but it never felt unsure. He felt very confident. His stories feel very confident, and he knows what he's doing, even when he's batting cleanup for some other stuff happening, like the Crisis or dealing with other things like that. Even that's what I think that's Paul at his most admirable as a writer, when he makes something out of nothing, makes lemonade out of basically John Byrne saying there was no Superboy. So like deal with it,
Or I think of all those Crisis crossovers, and it's funny, like as I was, doing all the research, like in those tales, when we get to the end of this, when he's pulling in Monitor and Harbinger from Crisis, because they had to appear in every book, and it makes no sense. Like you're reading this and you're like, this does not make a lick of sense.
Not with what's coming.
And somehow he's able to like, nope, I got to do it. Like I'm going to, I'm a company man, exactly what you said. Yeah. I'm going to somehow somehow pull this off. And I thought it was, I think your point is great. Like he's, they know they can trust him. They know he's not going to, blow everything up. That's our 5 years later discussion later where everything gets blown up.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah.
But I think as well, like he's got this great opportunity. And then we barely mentioned this before, and we have to call this out. Then Keith Giffen joins. And when you talk about great writer-artist teams of the last, of the history of comics, Levitz and Giffen, like to me, they're in the same conversation as Claremont and Byrne and Wolfman and Perez, and like guys where you're like, this is this epic run where these guys are, it's as you say, firing on all cylinders. Like they're hitting home runs every issue.
Yeah, I mean, they've got this Lennon-McCartney dynamic that you see with Claremont Byrne. You see it too with Perez and Wolfman, because you can also see them apart. You can see what Titans was without Perez. Yeah. You can see what the X-Men were without Byrne, and you see what Byrne does without Claremont. And I think the same applies to, particularly with the Legion, you can literally see what Paul does without Keith, and then you see what Keith does without Paul. And they're both very different, and they temper each other in a way that creates something so special. And that's when the run, to me, gets going, really starts cooking, because, no offense to Pat Broderick, who I think is a great artist, but Keith just brings in another level. And you almost get 3 artists for the price of one.
Yeah.
Because he changes his style a few times during each run and comes back again.
Right.
Yeah. It's a great point. I mean, Pat Broderick comes on and immediately the look changes and it gets to I'm going to say to a more modern look. And I think there's another one, and we've mentioned editors as well on this podcast before, because I don't think they get enough credit. Mm-hmm. I think it's, like Mike W. Barr is the first one when all of this begins. And so you have a writer and a creator, and he's a guy who I don't think gets enough credit when people look back at like great books of the 70s and 80s.
His Batman is amazing.
Yeah.
To think he was doing that at the same time Miller and Mazzucchelli were doing year one. You have this very classic Batman and Robin story with Alan Davis is just crazy.
Mm-hmm. Or there's that Batman special he did with Marshall Rogers, which is like, that should be just continually in reprint. Like it just should be a standard Batman book. And Jim has this look on his face like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, no. I'm the big Batman guy. So
you're with us on this?
Yeah, or Batman Year 2. Batman Year 2 I thought was
Batman
great.
Year 2, Batman and the Outsiders, him and Jim Aparo. I mean, like he comes in, and then you get this newer take on the characters, and then Laurie Sutton takes over, and then finally when we get Karen Berger takes over, I think right as the Great Darkness Saga is starting. Like that's how she's joining the team. And I think that's it's this third piece of the puzzle. And then Larry Malstead comes on at the very beginning of the Great Darkness Saga. And now we have the art team, right? We've got Giffen, we've got Malstead, and then the book is really cooking. So here's the thing. We could probably spend 3 hours talking about the Great Darkness Saga, but we all have lives. I am just going to say this, because we will eventually do an episode on the Great Darkness Saga. We've been putting off all of the big stuff. Read it. I don't think this is hyperbole to say, I think this is the greatest Legion story ever.
Yeah.
I think if you start with Legion Annual 1 and you go to the end of the Great Darkness Saga, to me, that's the best 6 issues in Legion history.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that this has been republished so many times over the last 30 years, right?
Yeah.
It's the perfect Legion book to hand to some, though I didn't
Yeah.
take the advice and I went on my own path. It is the perfect trade to hand to someone and say, you want to get into the Legion, this is if you don't like this, don't bother.
There's two books that are hardcover releases of it. The first one is the Great Darkness Saga itself, but it also includes a lot of the before and after stories that set the table. And then they also released The Curse, which is effectively the back half of the run for the Bronze Age stuff here.
And that's a beautiful story.
It's just such a, I mean, yeah, it's a great collection. Place of honor on my shelf there. And so, yeah, if anybody out there who's listening has not bought these, go ahead and buy it because it's going to be worth the money.
Yeah, and it's also, you can really tell, like, obviously Paul and Keith were the main artists, engineers of this run, but whenever Paul does his little detours, he would always bring in Kurt Swan, he'd bring in Dave Gibbons, and you can see the connective tissue between Kurt and Dave, and these workmanlike artists that had a very clean line, were amazing storytellers. And even to this day, I still feel like Kurt Swan is underrated. I mean, those issues with Romeo Tong Hall inking him are just like, I would stop at every page and just look at how beautiful the layout, the character faces, the expressions, just a nice coda to this amazing career, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that was, I think the Starboy feature was a Kurt Swan issue. That was, you're right. The artist styles just complement each other. You can tell they're different, but it's part of the same, I guess, tapestry that they've created in this particular run.
Yeah, and also it's a perfect, like, if you are a longtime Legion fan, it's a perfect callback to like peak Legion of the 60s when it was Shooter and Swan basically making the team, kind of setting all the, like setting the foundation for what Levitz would do. But it also, like, what I loved is, like, so many writers have problems when they do the nostalgia where they're like, we're going to go back and look at this. And Levitz was great at mixing it all together. So he brought in Kurt Swan. I want to call out Howard Bender as well, who was doing great John Forte impersonations, and his contributions as well were great. And the book felt like an old book, even though it wasn't. Like, it felt like those old stories. I will say this, and I hate to admit this, but like, so I read these when they came out, right? Like, so I was a 12, 13-year-old kid buying these, and I hated the Kurt Swan stuff when I was young because I'm like, I want something 80s style. I don't want the 60s. But as I've gotten older, I go back and I appreciate them a lot more. I'm like, oh, okay, I get why this works. But as a kid, I was just like, why are they doing this? Like, I don't want to see this.
I was
style.
the same with like Sal Buscema on Spectacular Spider. I was a Spider-Man kid, and so I'd read Eric Larson and Mark Bagley. That was like the modern artist, and Sal was doing Spectacular. But it wasn't until much later that I was like, oh, this is the winner here. Like, this is the great storytelling. I mean, they were all great, but and also appreciating Dave Cockrum. Like, I was reading the classic X-Men at the same time as the Jim Lee X-Men, and it felt very old and retro, but then you come to appreciate it as you get a little older. It wasn't soon after that I was like, this guy's really the good one.
Yeah, but I think that's a great point. Like Kurt Swan, I think has moved into that dramatically underrated category where people, I'm trying to think of a good sports metaphor, because I always go to that for any non-comic readers, and I think he's almost the Kareem of comics, where like people don't appreciate how long his career lasted and how damn good he was for such a long time. Because we just think of the modern stuff, and you look back and go, oh, that's boring, and they just did this, and he didn't play defense. But Kurt Swan
kind of like not Earl Morrall, I guess, not to get too old, but like the solid quarterback that gets you to the Super Bowl that might not be lighting up the scoreboard.
It's a Terry Bradshaw.
Yeah, like Terry Bradshaw.
Yeah, you look at the Bradshaw stats nowadays. Everybody looks at him and goes, "This guy was horrible," and you're like, 4 Super Bowls, like no.
Yeah, Bob Greasy, like like just a solid game manager that gets the job done. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys a little bit of a different question. So obviously, we're gushing on this particular one because it's just so good. What was there anything that didn't work for you guys in this particular stretch of comics?
That's a tough one. As much as I love obviously Giffen, I love Keith's art. I think he's a master. I did find sometimes the stylistic changes there was some whiplash. There's literally one issue where he goes from like traditional Giffen Malstead to like Munoz.
Yeah.
And I think it's a Stargirl. Stargirl's the protagonist in some way. And it was like a loud record scratch. But I mean, then you get used to it and you're like, oh, cool, he's trying new things and it's amazing. And even that, I guess it's part of the charm of the run. Like, you never know what you're going to get. So that's cool. So I know I'm going back on my own criticism, but that's the only thing that really jumps out at me. And I wish Paul's run hadn't ended. I kind of, when the bifurcation of Legion and Tales, like, I kind of wish that it had stayed one book. You know what I mean? Like I felt like the tail stuff didn't resonate as much, even though I really liked. I gained a new appreciation for Terry Shoemaker. I love the Jurgen stuff. Carl Kiesel did a great job inking him on those early issues. It just felt less essential. Those stories felt less essential. And I know Paul wasn't writing them completely, like Mindy Newell was scripting, but I just wanted the main Legion book. I wanted Paul and Keith on the main Legion book, or Paul and Greg LaRocque and, whoever was the main artist, Steve Lytle. But I wanted to stay in Paul's vision, and I felt that bifurcation watered it down a little bit.
All right. I have 3 choices. You already talked about one of them. And again, I'm going to go back to kid reading these books issue by issue. So I'll just call it out. It's issue 307. It's the Prophet Omen story. It's when he goes full Munoz. And as a kid, I remember, like, you're so used to this. I always sort of say, like, it's a Jim Starlin inspired Giffen. And it's also a manga. Like, he's even said, like, he was reading a lot of manga stuff, and he was pulling some of these ideas from there. And then suddenly it's this dramatic shift that you don't see coming. And as a kid, I remember just going like, what the actual, like, what is this? And I think it's different when you're reading it as a trade and you're reading it as a, like, and you're kind of like, okay, cool. And then you've got a couple of issues. But when you're going to the comic shop or you're going to the newsstand and you're picking this up and you're going, And I remember as a kid flipping back to the credits going like, who's the new artist? Like, what's going on? And going, because it's like, I read over these comics and I hate to admit this because I can't draw stick figures at this point in my life, but I used to like sketch out the Giffen stuff, and I can still tell you which panels I would copy.
Right.
He was in my top 3. Like, I'm putting him in the same category with guys that I, and then this happens and you're like,
it's jarring.
Yeah, like, and again, like, now I can go back and I look and I can appreciate a little bit more, and I can appreciate that he's trying to do. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the fact that he's openly stealing in some cases. I do appreciate that he's pushing the boundaries, and that is the one thing that like with Giffen, say what you will about. I mean, I've written this, and I think I've said it. I mean, he is one of the best breakdown artists in the history of comics.
100%.
He can lay out a page better than almost anybody else. Like, I don't think Kevin Maguire has the career he has if he's not learning off Giffen's breakdowns on Justice League. And you can say that about
at 52. Like, he laid out every single issue of 52 and Countdown.
Right. And he has provided. Actually, it was funny. I remember I got into this online discussion where the guy basically said, like, is Giffen not at the same level of Moore and Morrison for like impact on DC Comics? And you can make that argument. Like, absolutely. I don't. And you can say like he is that important. But those issues, like, even when I go back to now, and even like logically I can understand it, I still go like, this isn't right. So the second one for me, you mentioned Tales as well. Let's just call her out as well. Like, Mindy Newell, is she not one of the first female writers in comics who's getting credit from one of the big 2 and the lead, like, in DC? Because I was thinking about that. I'm like, who else who wasn't married to a writer? Like, I remember Roy and Dan Thomas, but aside from that, like, how many other women were writing in 1984? Like independent, yes. Like, you've got Wendy Pini, you've got a few other, like, in small stuff, but like,
like mainstream superhero comics. I don't know.
You're not seeing this. And I agree with you. Like, I kind of wish they hadn't done it. I understand why they did. I understand why Levitz wasn't fully writing, because I think, he's trying to run a company at the same time he's trying to write the Legion.
This is his night job. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But, and I agree with you. I wish Terry Shoemaker had done more. Like, I think his art's beautiful in this. Like, but yeah, Dan Jurgens, I've always been a fan of. But it just, it's not to that level. And then the Dawnstar Brainiac 5 story, I still kind of have a good laugh about.
Yeah, it's a journey.
And then for me, the third one, and you mentioned it before, and it's tough to say this because I love everybody involved in it, but annual number 2 with Levitz and Dave Gibbons for Projector and Karate Kid's wedding. I think it's the weakest of all of these stories. And I just keep thinking, like, it's Karate Kid and Projectra. Let them do something. Like, it's their wedding issue, and then they're going to disappear. Like, let him be involved. And instead, it's these other 5 people, and they go back, and we realize the Greek gods are Derlins. That's the one for me.
Yeah, that was wild, but I think it's also, it's drawn by Dave Gibbons, so it's so beautiful. Like, I think he could have drawn the phone book, and I would have been invested. But yeah, that's a valid point.
I think it's because I love Karate Kid as a character, and I was just like, just give me some karate. It's his wedding. And I felt the same way, like, when Bouncing Boy and Duodamsel got married, and Bouncing Boy just stands around and watches Superboy do everything. And I'm like, let him do something. It's his wedding issue. Like, let the guy, be the hero. So
Yeah, I think I lean
I'm
more
being
towards
nitpicky, but
Giffen. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm on the Giffen
Yeah.
side of Karate Kid, I think. But I don't want to get kicked off the podcast.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
All good. Well, it's funny you guys mentioned that. So I had the same thoughts. Effectively, Tails being kind of the weaker piece of it, and the Prophet and Omen story was just kind of weird for me. I was just like, okay, whatever.
Is that the one that Paul said was basically them doing Galactus? Like,
yes, but it was just weird because you had like all this buildup with this Prophet guy who I was reading it the other day, and I'm like, this guy looks like Steven Seagal. But then you only get the Omen character just pops up at the very end, and you're just like, okay, all right,
yeah,
whatever.
that's the outlier.
Yeah, I didn't feel very invested in that particular story. And then the other one was the Legion Academy story was kind of weak for me, just because the only reason I say that is because I feel like, when you have these Academy stories, they just kind of take away from the main Legion, right? There's plenty of actual Legionnaires, so I just wanted to see more of them versus these other characters.
The tail stuff for me almost felt like going back to the idea of a spreadsheet or like the ABC plot, like almost like the B plot got its own title, but it hadn't really graduated to A plot. And we're nitpicking now. I mean, the run as a whole is magnificent. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to say that these are the worst parts of this is, it's still, there's still
pretty great,
really solid books and definitely worth checking out. And again, like even the Tales, as much as I can say, like, yeah, it's obviously not to peak, but there's so many good things in there. And like, I mean, the whole Brainiac 5 Supergirl bits, the Dark Circle stuff, like it's, that you still have a bunch of good Legion stuff. Yeah. And as we mentioned, like the art is really, really good. And I'm glad you called out Carl Kiesel. Like
Kiesel.
I think that's his early stuff too. Like these are all guys who were coming out of New Talent Showcase, right? Or the New Talent program, which is another, like when you think about that, they handed over the second best selling book at DC to a bunch of newbies. Like, hey, welcome to the company. You're going to take over, like one of the two books that's actually competing with Marvel. Have fun. Because didn't this lead to Booster Gold? Like, wasn't that Jurgens goes from this to Booster Gold?
I think he goes to Booster after this, and then there is a Booster Legion crossover pretty early on. Which is yeah, it's amazing. And Jurgens with Kiesel in particular, I think I've told Dan this, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a long time. I said, you have had so much luck with inkers, like, Brett Breeding on Superman, but then Joe Rubenstein, Kevin Nolan on Alien Superman, and Norm Rappin obviously has done a lot. R.T. Bear inked him early with Adventures, but then Carl Kiesel, he has the kind of line that inkers love, I think, because you can really like riff on it and make it something special. So it was so cool to see this early pairing, and it's beautiful stuff.
Yeah, and sadly, it hasn't been reprinted anywhere. Like, I don't think you can get any of this unless you have the original issues, or unless it's on the app, right?
It's on the app. Yeah, that's how I read it.
Yeah. Like I've got all the floppies because my wife hates my collection.
Do you have like a whole room just for the Legion stuff?
Background? Like, so she's like, "Are you ever going to get rid of those?" And I'm like, "Nope."
No. No, I mean, I have a New York apartment, so there's just no chance of that. But I'm thankful for the app.
Yeah. So we talked about Great Darkness Saga. We've talked about sort of the intro. There's another huge storyline here that I wanted to spend some time on, and we referenced it in the beginning, and that's the whole Shrinking Violet story. And we've talked a lot about like building subplots. So this is something that, where would we say the groundwork is laid?
It's the groundwork for this is laid in 286, 287. So, and in fact, they call it out very specifically in issue 305, where they say that they did the switch, I think, the day that they left for Kundia.
Yeah,
on that mission. Yeah. So this happens very, very early on in the run.
Yeah, and I wanted you to say this. I'm assuming everybody knows, but just so that we're not talking about something and we're leaving everybody in the dark. So Shrinking Violet is kidnapped by Microlad and a bunch of Imskian separatists. She is replaced by a Durlan who can replicate her powers, named Yera. They go to Kundia, and then Colossal Boy finally hits on who he thinks is Shrinking Violet, and that's been a long-running story. Like, when did that get started? In the 60s?
Yeah.
Right? And so he finally acts on it. We get, and again, it's just floating in the background. We get the whole Great Darkness Saga, which she fights through as a Durlan. We get this great moment where Duplicate Boy realizes that his girlfriend's cheating on him, and flies down to Earth and proceeds to start beating the crap out of Colossal Boy. in the Himalayas and then looks over and basically says, "That's not the Violet I know." And as a longtime reader, you're like, I don't even think it clued in that there was something else going on.
Right.
I think it was just they've changed and they've grown. Then it's Siobhan, Element Lad, and Brainy and Chameleon Boy, right? And they, or no,
So
not Chameleon
cool.
Boy. And they go, "There's a traitor," and they figure it out. They reveal it, and then we get the big twist that Closet Boy's married, and he married who he thought was Shrinking Violet.
Whoops.
And stays with her. Yeah.
There is a clue in that particular issue where where Duplicate Boy comes down and fights with Colossal Boy, because he busts in on the two of them in their hotel room, and she is like, "Who are you?" And if you're a reader, right, that you've been reading this for a while, that should be a major tell that something is very, very wrong here.
That was the first sign to me that something was amiss with Violet. It's just again, Paul is a great plotter. It's a well-crafted mystery, and it has room to breathe. So you have it just escalates. It goes from the C plot to then becoming the A plot in a really smart way. And going back to the idea of subtext versus overtly explaining, once things get situated and Violet is back, the relationship with Lightning Lass is also very subtextual, obviously a product of the time. He couldn't overtly pair them together. And it then becomes overt later on, but he does it in such a cool way and a very progressive way that I thought was really meaningful.
Yep. Yeah. And, I just pulled up the issue here of 298 where the fight happens.
Mm-hmm.
There's just little cool moments here. We talk about how he lets the characters breathe and they have their own voices. There's this great bit where, as part of the fight, you mentioned Siobhan, Element Lad, Chinya, and Joe show up to help fight Duplicate Boy, and they're ready to leave the two newlyweds alone. And random girl says, "Are you ready to leave, or do you want to check into Hotel Tacky?"
Oh my!
So it's just great how they have these their own little voices in their own way, and sometimes they can be snarky, sometimes they can be funny and serious. It's just he brings the whole package here.
Yeah, I mean, I love how he writes Tinya and Shadow Lass. Just they're snarky, snippy, sharp.
Yep.
I think he had a lot of fun with those characters.
But Jay, to your point about the Violet episode, you get to the point where Yira is confronted with the whole fact that she is actually a Durlin and the gig is up, and then she ends up helping trap Microlad and the rest of the conspirators. But it's just great moments. And by the end of the whole run, Violet's back in business, and she's goes back and gives Duplicate Boy a little bit of what for.
Which that was cool.
Good bit of comeuppance there, So no stone is left unturned with regards to the characterizations here.
And one thing I thought really interesting about this is they could have dragged the capture of Microlad out, but they actually wrap it up. Like they're just like, this is the not important part of this. Like, let's get her out. And I know we'll talk about this more when we get to as we continue on our timeline and we talk about volume 3, but like the best part of all of this is it's Violet who makes all these changes and becomes a new character. And we'll see that more. And she's and they essentially just make her this far more interesting character with all of these changes. So it's not just a story that they just forget about. It's like, here's this huge twist, and it has, there's ramifications for the rest of this run, the rest of the time Levitz is writing the character. And I think even when we get into Reboot and 3-Boot, it's a more, they write Shrinking Violet in the beginning of Reboot as being very shy and reserved, but anytime she has to take charge, that powerful character comes out. And 3-Boot definitely, when she's Atom Girl, right?
Yes.
And I think they've just changed the character for the better. Whereas again, you go back to old issues, and she's always like the meek, shy. Well, except when she was cheating on Duplicate Boy with Matter Eater Lad.
Well, there was this one issue which kind of ties into this particular storyline. Back in the 70s, where there was something going on with Imsk, where I guess they were looking to possibly get out of the United Planets, and she was very, I guess, willful about her opinions around that. But even still, at the end of the day, they kind of show her as a bit of a crybaby by the end of that issue. And so this here is a complete reinvention of the character, and
for sure,
very much somebody with a lot more agency than was shown in the past.
And I just want to say, like, generally speaking, one thing that I felt strongly about the Levitz run is that every character felt lived in.
Yeah.
Every character evolved, changed, had momentum, but it felt very earned and very like natural. And as you guys know, my trajectory for reading the Legion was a bit awkward, not linear.
Yeah.
So I went back and I read, and by the time I got to the end of the Levitz run, and the next option was really to jump into the reboot or the retro boot, I felt this great emptiness because I knew that these new iterations weren't going to have this
Yeah.
baggage,
Yeah.
this emotional weight, these dynamics, and they would be basically wiped clean. And so it's almost like I could really relate to the older readers at that time who were like, well, I'm not going to hop aboard this new version because what about my Legion?
Yeah.
And it's just Paul knows these characters so well and has lived with them for so long, whether as a writer or a fan or later on as just someone overseeing the company, but they feel very three-dimensional. And again, not to keep bringing up Chris Claremont, but I think that's also the vibe for X-Men. These relationships are deeply felt and deeply experienced. And so when someone else comes in, you're like, oh, this is different.
Yeah.
That doesn't have the same power to it.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. I mean, given your trajectory of reading these stories, and you're reading the 5 years later first, and you see all these folks, like so particularly, calling out the Violet and Ayla relationship.
Yeah.
That's very well defined at the beginning of that particular run. So when you go back and you read this, that doesn't even happen, right? That doesn't really start happening until V3, honestly.
Yeah. And then but then your antenna are up because you start seeing the subtext being laid because you know where it's going, which is really fascinating. And I think Giffen really benefits from so much of that because he's got all these built-in relationships that he can mine and tweak and push forward, and it's really fertile ground for him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, another thing I wanted to talk about with regards to this particular run, and this is as we get towards the end of the run and it turns into Tales, because this is where they're obviously setting up for the Baxter run, right? So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, right after the Prophet and Omen storyline, they have this whole, I guess, series of issues where they're literally setting up for the Baxter run. So you get the new headquarters, you get the Computo is kind of redone into this, Major Domo character now. I kind of like the issue 311 where the headquarters is redone. I really kind of liked it. It was a little bit cheesy, but I actually kind of enjoyed it.
It was fun, yeah.
It reminded me of, I don't know if you ever watched the old Voltron cartoon from the 80s. There's this one story element where the castle that they were living in just gets destroyed, and this brand new castle kind of rises up out of the ruins, and it's all this shininess and new stuff, and that kind of stuff really appealed to the inner kid in me, I guess.
Well, I think it's a great call out of another thing about this run that I think makes it really stand out is Giffen is throwing new ideas almost every issue of and just like elevating the science fiction. So like instead of having a headquarters that's stuck in the ground, we now have a flying headquarters. Instead of having robots that look like something you'd see, and again, like Legion has always been influenced by Star Trek. Instead of having a Star Trek influence, he's like, I'm going to go in a different direction. Or to go way back, the very first issue, Levitz is like, here are the new Legion cruisers. Like, we're getting a new look here.
Yeah. And those cruisers, by the way, remained in use in the Legion books up through like the year 2000.
Wow.
Yeah. They kept those. They kept that the Legion cruiser style all the way through into the reboot.
Which is funny because Giffen redoes the visual look of the Legion at least 5 times.
Yeah.
When he comes back towards the end of the original second Levitz run, he redoes all their costumes, and that's like a few months before 5 years later starts.
Right. It's very much a Star Wars in style. I think in the 70s, it was very much influenced by Star Trek. 60s was very Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and now we're in the 80s, and obviously it's a big lean into the Star Wars style, right? But I love this just because I know in the later Legion stories, right, they did things by teleportation and stuff like that, but I really dig spaceships. I love spaceship fights and stuff like that. So I thought it was beautiful, and that's yet another thing that I love about this particular.
You said something, Jim, about like Levitz having to kind of pull Giffen back a little bit, and that's I think the Venn diagram of longtime Giffen collaborators like J.M. DeMatteis, the Beer Bombs, Levitz. They've all said some version of, we kind of tried to pull him back, and then this is what happens. Like, you got something, a little bit of a tempered Giffen, because if it was just up to Keith, it would be kind of, he'd blow up the earth every issue almost, not but and that's his just idea space. He's just so full of ideas, and having that balance or that counterbalance is really important, I think.
Yeah, and you see that in a lot of the background stuff, like when they introduce. I mean, I always think of that where Karate Kid's playing Space Invaders, but he's hitting the ships, or all the Dungeons and Dragons references that start coming out, and they're playing, and that this is stuff that they're just, hey, let's give a sense of their life or their world or what's around them, and I could be wrong on this, but I think this is one of the first times where we really start seeing them like out of costume. I mean, there was little bits and pieces in the past, but they really start embracing the, like, here's how they're, here's, like, for example, like, here's, they're in the hospital getting ready, the Saturn girl's about to give birth, and she's, obviously because she's so pregnant, it's like, like, it's not the Saturn girl costume, and we're changing everything. And yeah, it's just this nice, like, you start to get a sense of who they are as people. And again, Alex, you've called this out many times, and I don't think we can call it out enough. Like, they're now people. They're no longer, just the, here's the smart guy, and here's the this. And it's so nice to see, like, you see the friendships, and we've talked about, Phantom Girl and Shadowlass, and this great, and it's that catty kind of friendship that just feels real. But that they'd still fight for their teammates, but also, like, we can't stand Timberwolf because of this, or we think Colossal Boy is a bit of a loser, or whatever. Right. I mean, to me, my favorite friendship of this whole run is the Block Timberwolf, where it's these two, and again, they really devolved Timberwolf into this very naive, like, just kind of dumb. I don't want to say dumb jock, because they always say that about Ultra Boy, but I don't see that either.
Yeah, no.
Just this guy who doesn't know his place in the world and doesn't know how to talk to people. So, of course, his best friend is this talking rock who definitely doesn't know how to talk to people and doesn't know.
But it's so sensitive and so empathic, it's really meaningful. And I do want to give credit, too, to Paul and Keith's handling of Dream Girl, who I think was a very one-note character in previous iterations, even the earlier Levitz run, and he gives her some depth and nuance that feels very mature and, like I said, lived in. Like, she's a complicated woman. Like, she obviously has this long-term relationship with Starboy. She's like a very sexually charged character, but there are ways to write that poorly, and I think Paul and Keith handle it in such a cool way that she feels very alive.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out. I was going to say that as well, because, I mean, this is a character who had been, when's the last good Dream Girl story where they write her as the genius that she is? Like, when you see her first appearance in Adventure Comics, and she's using the rules to destroy the Legion, she's changes, like Lightning Lass to Light Lass. Like, so this is obviously this brilliant person, but then from then on in, it's just, well, we got to use her. So she shows up, has a dream. Dave Cockrum gets to draw her as sexy as humanly possible. And we don't need her for another 6 months. And this is another one that I really miss about modern comics, that fan vote for the leadership. Because if the fans hadn't voted her in, that doesn't happen. Like, she doesn't get elevated the way she gets elevated. But like, Levitz and Giffen are suddenly like, we have to do this, and we have to do it during the biggest storyline we've come up with.
What a cool twist, though. Yeah.
Like, it's Great Darkness Saga that she takes over as the leader, and she's immediately like, okay, I'm capable. But she doesn't break from character. She's still like, I broke a nail. This sucks. Or I have to get my hair. Yeah, I mean, it's so well done, and it elevated that character. Again, I'm so glad you called that out, because it's one of the strengths. And you talked way earlier about how well Levitz writes women. Like, it's another example. Like, here's a woman who's super smart, but also cares about fashion and cares about style and wants to look good and is pampered and is a princess.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we weren't in the room, but I'm sure Karen Berger, the editor of that run, was a huge part of that too. Like, and I do appreciate that you guys spotlight the editors, because knowing what Karen will do, like, in the coming years after this, you see a lot of it starting here. And she brought an outside perspective, not being a diehard comic book superhero fan, to these books that I think elevated the work.
It's kind of funny when we talk about the big runs of the 80s. I think that's one of the reasons why, like, I love the Wolfman Perez New Teen Titans run, that original run, but there's moments that have not aged well.
Yes.
And you go like, yeah. And even like, and I love the Claremont Burn and like all that stuff, but there's a few moments in there where you just like, whereas this one, I don't feel that there's I can think of only one moment where in modern, like to a modern take, you'd kind of cringe and go like, okay, Element Lad probably shouldn't have pretended to be a black guy when they were pretending to be police officers. But I mean,
Yeah.
if that's the worst you can get, like, but instead you have all these strong female characters, nobody's really written down, and there's no moment, like, and I would even say, like, as you know, like the idea of Colossal Boy staying with his wife even after finding out that she's been lying to him, like that says something about his character that you can still respect even today. And we'll talk about Colossal Boy in a future episode, and I know I'll be the only one defending him, but
but I mean, there was an easy path there. The easy path is to make her the villain, and they fight her and beat her, and then Colossal Boy feels bad, and it goes in the other direction. Paul and Keith and Karen chose the more complicated and the more meaningful story. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Claremont post-Byrne and Levitz with Giffen, they both had female editors like Weezy Simonson and Nascenti on X-Men and Karen on Legion. And I think together that really drove the narrative to be much more textured.
Well, it's a really simple thing. Like, I don't know how many different ways we can say the more diverse voices you have in a room, the better the story is going to be.
Absolutely.
But like, this is the perfect example of that. The more voices you have, the more difference of opinions, the better everything's going to be. And I mean, I think you can pretty safely say, and I say this loving these books, but the fact that Marv Wolfman is editing his own stuff might be the reason why some of that stuff got through, that nowadays you read and you go like, you know, maybe having Wonder Girl marry your doppelganger wasn't the smart, wasn't the best choice. And I think you're exactly right. And I mean, great call out on Anna Senti and Louis Simonson. Like, again, they don't get enough credit for their role in the X-Men, and they should. And it's kind of funny, like you hear all these stories about people who worked for Marvel at that time. We're going to go off on a tangent about how important Anna Senti and Louis Simonson were.
So talented. Yeah, it's just great writers, great editors, great people. I think I've said this before, and I think there's an essay to be written about the parallels between like Claremont Uncanny and Levitz Legion and just how they are kind of in conversation, maybe not intentionally. Like, I don't really know what Paul and Chris's is, but I mean, like, as creative runs and comic book runs of like big teams and big universes, it's really a how-to guide of how to handle such complex universes with care and character driven and not just big bombastic stories, which you kind of see with the X-Men books in the 90s. Like, they just become about the plot and less about the character in some instances. I'll defend like Fabian Niciez's run on X-Men. Like, Claremont was always about plot out of character, and I think Paul does that too. The plot springs from character conflict as opposed to characters reacting to the plot.
Yeah, I agree. And I sometimes wonder if it's just like, I know in the case of Claremont, he had a big theater background, and so I think he was coming from a non-comic or less of a comic break. But I sometimes wonder as well, is like, are these the guys who are the most affected by Lee and Kirby? And that's where this is coming from. Whereas like a lot of the other creators, maybe not as much, and again, I think there's the genuine love for the characters. Like, and I think Jerry Conway is an amazingly good writer. I don't think he was a good Legion writer because I don't think he cared about that. And I think you have to have both of those. Like, you have to have this desire to be there, and you also have to have sort of the to want to write the comics that you would have wanted to read, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think you have to have some passion. Yeah, you have to have some. I think Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas, both amazing writers, both were probably not huge Legion fans, but Paul, like from the first page of his second run and even earlier, he loves these characters, and he's excited about adding to the lore. And I think for me as a writer, when I get an assignment and I'm not passionate about the characters, it's much harder to get to telling a good story. Like, for me, like Renee Montoya is probably my favorite DC character. So getting that opportunity, I was like, I'm going to put all the things I want to see in a Renee Montoya story under the pillars that have been set up for me. So it's, it shows on the page.
Oh, it definitely does. I mean, I mentioned this on Bluesky just a little while ago. I mean, I just read that. Question. I know we normally do like the hype and tell people to buy stuff at the end of the podcast, but I'm just going to say this right now. If you haven't read The Question All Along the Watchtower, and I say this as somebody who knew so little about this going in, it's so good. And I got to call it the art. You got so lucky.
Yeah, I did.
He is like, wow.
Yeah. It looks just so amazing.
Good. Yeah, because I was not a big Question person, but I was a Renee Montoya fan, right? Because that's I was reading Batman voraciously when she was introduced as a character. So I thought it was great, and the story, like Jay said, I can't say enough good things about it. It was a great read, really.
And there's so many, if you love Easter eggs, there's a lot in there too. I mean, You can see the
totally.
heckler in there.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out as well is anybody who says that the Legion is too hard to follow because there's too many characters, after reading that book, when the Bulleteer shows up, I'm like, sorry, there is no way that you can tell me that like I can't follow Shrinking Violet and Dream Girl in this, and you can't like no. If Justice League Unlimited works, Legion works. Like, let's just go with that.
And let's be real here. Like, people love lore. I love the lore. I love to be immersed in something and being able to kind of go back and reference. Not everyone reads the same way, but as an X-Men reader coming into the Legion, I was like, okay, this is my kind of book. This is complicated, lots of characters, and you just go in and dive in and hope that you can tread water, and that's fun.
Yeah. And it also is important if the characters are done well enough, then you're going to be invested in them eventually, just because you want to find out what happens next and what happens to these characters. And so, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. And speaking of the lore, like one thing that Levitz does really well here, I'm going to pull back to the topic.
Yeah. All right. We're here for Paul. Yeah.
As much as we can go off on 50 different tangents, and God knows we will. He embraces the lore of the highs of the Legion and the lows of the Legion. Like we talked about the whole Shrinking Violet storyline. Like that was a one-issue story in the 70s about Imsky and Rebels and I think a lot of other Legion writers like who would follow Levitz would throw out. Like one of my big criticisms about a lot of the reboots is that they love the 60s and then the 70s they're like, that never happened. Like we don't care about this. But and I've written so much about 5 years later, and I know I can go off on rants. Like that was one of the things that kind of really annoyed me about 5 years later is it's like, okay, we're going to elevate like crappy villains from the 60s, like Evola, but then like all the stuff in the 70s, that never happened. We don't care about this. We're ignoring this. And you're like, no, the Legion is all of this. Like the Legion is every part of it. Like if you're going to worship this part, you've got to include everything else. And I think Levitz really did that.
It's like the Morrison view on Batman. Their perspective was it all happened, and you just cherry pick the stuff you want to play with.
Yeah, exactly. We've said this, I guess, talking to various folks over the last year, that when they bring the Legion back, that should be the way they approach it, right? Because there's so much good stuff in there. It would be crazy not to cherry pick the stuff that's really, really good. And leverage that as part of your background.
Yeah, and I think, not to speak for an entire fandom, but I think Legion fans want to read something with their favorite characters doing cool stuff and having some momentum and feeling like they're not starting at zero. I say this as someone who doesn't know the particulars of what's coming. I'm excited. I trust that Josh Williamson is going to do something amazing. And from what he said online, it sounds like it's going to be really cool. And it's not, I think it's hard to deal with multiple reboots. And I think that's where you lose a lot of the built-in connection to the characters. For me, the Superboy retcon really started to make things wobbly. And this is a whole podcast episode unto itself. And you guys did that Superboy episode. But, Superboy, then the Mon-El punch, it all just made it a little harder to balance. And the kind of retro booting or retrofitting of Mon-El to replace Superboy, it was fun at the time and admirable storytelling, particularly by the Beer Bombs and Keith. I know this is not a 5 years later episode, but you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. It's admirable in the moment.
Yeah.
But that's the stuff that made it hard to kind of connect everything together.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you as a X-Men fan.
Yeah.
They've done a few of their own reboots over the years, right? Probably softer, not quite as hard of a reboot as the Legion done. Yeah. But how do you feel if that's affected? Or was it just because it wasn't as more of a soft reboot versus a full?
I think that's it. Like I think Hickman is the one that says like, it's not continuity, it's consistency. It's like you pick the stories. Continuity are the stories that matter, the stories that people count. And there can be stories that just fade away because the fandom doesn't respond to it. So you have this big sea change like Krakoa, which worked so well for such a long time. And it really worked because it recognized everything that came before and made the characters feel lived in. And I think you could say the same for Grant's run on New X-Men. It was something that felt like they wrote the characters in a way that it felt like they had read these books before and they understood what had come before. So, I think respecting what has happened while not being beholden to it, that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think kind of steering back to Paul Levitz a little bit, I think he's a writer that I think does that as well as try to take new chances as well. Like, so, we were talking about the Violet issues here in this particular run, but obviously, in the reboot, there's a whole history of the major storyline of Violet with the
Right.
Emerald Eye and being affected by that. And Levitz reused that. Levitz used that a little bit and touched on it a little bit in his annual in the Retro Boot. And not only that, but the animated series even kind of touched on it a
I
little
thought
bit.
that was cool. I mean, I read the Retro Boot and liked it, I think, a lot more than I expected to, because it felt like Paul was definitely trying to keep readers on their toes. And I think the easy road is to just play the covers, you know, and I think sometimes the reboot falls into that trap where we're just kind of playing the hits.
Yep.
Whereas the Retro Boot, it really pushed things in my mind, in my own twisted headcanon. You can still count the Retro Boot leading into 5 years later, but that's just just my own like obsession to like make things fit together.
I think I've just embraced the multiple universe theory on this. Like, to me, the Retro Boot and the OG aren't the same, and they're all in their own little worlds. And so it's kind of funny because I'm doing the reread of the Retro Boot right now, and it's very interesting going and seeing what Paul's doing. And you never know, is it editorial interference or is it his choice? Because I know, like, at the time there was so many moving parts. It's like you say, like, there's so much stuff coming from different editorial divisions. And I mean, that's the other part about the Legion. It was this was the last time, like, this run is the last time that he kind of gets to play without any interference. And it's not, and you see it when we get to Tales, and we joked about it being with Crisis, but like, that had been the Legion up until this point. They were their own little world, and there was never any connection to the rest of the DC universe, like, because Superboy wasn't really connected to the DC universe.
Right.
So there wasn't that moment. And so he could just do whatever he wanted. He had these toys, and then every single time they get tied into something else, like, hey,
Millennium.
you've got, or I just think, Millennium, or like, I just think of that, like, hey, welcome to 5 years later. Like, you can't use anything Kryptonian. And it's like, what? And Green Lanterns, you can't use them. Thanagarians, you can't use them. Like, you got nothing. And he's like, and they're like, okay, what do we, like, how do we do a Legion when we don't have a Superboy?
Yeah, it's so hard to do that. And it's, I think it works when you can echo the present day without literally connecting to it. I think that the Crisis crossovers are very, like, my brain hurts reading them, because it's like Brainiac is surprised Supergirl died, even though it happened like in the past, and it's just weird. And then there's the Crisis wave, it's still going. It's just bizarre, but it's also, that's comics. That's the fun of comics. Like, you're just kind of playing along, you're all jamming together. It's really insane.
Like, you see the Crisis wave wiping out planets in the 31st century, and if you think for 3 seconds, you're like, this makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
I mean, the Millennium one makes even less sense when you actually think about it, but it's like,
but it was a cool twist. I mean, it was a neat, I think, of all those Millennium crossovers, which I think structurally as a crossover is a cool motif. Like, hey, you can play or not play depending on how into it you want to be. Paul, again, showed that he really likes to be the company guy and will play by the rules and make it something interesting. And that was a cool reveal.
Yeah. And it worked because it was the perfect way to get rid of a Superman character that you could no longer have in continuity anyways. Like, it just didn't make any sense. But it was just it was a shame to see her go, because it was another, I think she was Mike Grell, right? Well, she has to be, because her costume was so tiny. That has to be a Mike Grell creation.
Just a cape.
Right? I say that not as a criticism, just as like,
we'll always have Kent Shakespeare.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Is there anything that we've missed about this run that we want to talk about, or any part of this that we should call
Well, I mean, let's just do a quick round of talking about why this is important. If you're wanting to read the Legion, or if you want to understand the Legion, why is this particular stretch so important?
I think for me, this was the point, like, having read 5 years later and been completely confused, but also intrigued and engaged, this was the heart of those characters. When I went back and reread 5 years later, it was with so much more feeling and empathy for these characters, because I felt like I saw them at their best, and now I was seeing them at the bottom. And it's really, like we said before, this is the book this is the run you hand to people and say, this is the Legion. Like, every character is defined, they sound different, they feel different, they change from the beginning to the end of this arc, and it's just a master class to me in, like, long form serialized comics. It's kind of a lost art, I think, today, because just market demands, like, there's just not enough runway aside from some creator owned books that can just run. But this is the Prime Legion. Like, if you don't like these books, you probably won't get into the Legion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, will fully admit my bias. Like, this is the Legion I grew up on. This is my favorite run. to me, this is the best run of the Legion. Like this, you go from 284 to, and like I'll stop at 306, like the Starboy spotlight, and say like to me, the Legion doesn't get any better than that. Even when I say like this is the weakest story, like when I say the annual, but it's still a good annual, and it's still like, and like I say, I think the Legion annual, the first one, is the best annual that's ever been printed. It's kind of one of those where, like, to me, this is peak comics. And I wouldn't even say peak 80s comics. This is just peak comics. If you want to see how the form can be done. And again, like, if you're a fan of team books, if you're a fan of X-Men, like, as you said, like we keep saying, like, this is a great way to get into this. If you love sci-fi, like that's why I got into this. And they're doing stuff that, honestly, like not many people were doing at the time. Like it was really revolutionary. And I think didn't we say to Paul during the podcast, like this should be the compact, like this is the Legion compact book that they should be putting out. Start at 284 and go to, like, that's what and get Legion fans that way. Like give them a cheap way to get these stories, because and Alex, you said it best. If you don't like the Legion after reading this, you're not going to like the Legion.
Yeah, it's not for you.
I agree with both what both of you are saying here. I mean, I think to me, really, I mean, just prepping for this conversation we're having, I just had a ball just going through and just reading these and looking at the images. To me, this is the best Legion run ever. And it is, I think it's better than the Baxter series, honestly. Just because there's so much more interesting, cool stuff going on. It's the Baxter Levitz stuff is also great, don't get me wrong, but I just think this is Alex, you said it best. It's a masterclass in how to do these kind of comics. It should be the template for anybody who wants to write any kind of comic book, whether it's a big team or just like Batman or Superman and his family, just running around doing stuff.
And it's two supreme, no disservice to anyone else, any creative team, but Levitz and Giffen, just the push and pull, the magic they had together. It should be up there with Claremont Byrne, Lee Kirby, and those kind of big creative pairings where I brought up Lennon McCartney. I'm a big Beatles head. Paul Kaminsky, who's a friend, is a big Beatles guy. I always think of Levitz and Giffen as like a Lennon McCartney dynamic. Like together they were great. Apart they did great things too, but that magic together is hard to replicate. And I think you see it with other great teams, but this is the run for it.
So the takeaway from this is, if you haven't read this, go read it.
Where you been?
Again, it's all on the app, which is so that's the easiest way to get this. It's one of those things where it's I think the reputation is so well deserved, and I don't think I've seen people comment that it feels old or it feels this, and they don't do comics like this anymore. Like you've got to get into the style, but I mean, I just think if you're a fan of comics, there's very few runs that I just don't think there's a disappointing part of this. And let's be honest, if you're listening to a Legion podcast, you at the very minimum have an interest in this, and you've got to go check. Like it's not like if we were on like I'm trying to think of.
We're not an Out and Alpha Flight podcast.
It's like if we were on a Punisher podcast, and I'm like, hey, go read the Legion. Like it's
but hopefully when we get the Joshua's book when that starts coming out, hopefully we get new readers out of that. And if they really like what Josh was doing, I think they need to go back and get these books, get the app, whatever. Like I said, so this is the Legion of Superheroes Great Darkness Saga Deluxe Edition. It's hardback, and this covers Legion 284 to 296 and the first annual. And then there's the Curse, which is another hardback, and this covers 297 to 313. So this is exactly the era that we're talking about. That's the best. If you're a new reader to the Legion, this is required reading. You gotta go through it, and you gotta read it.
And also, this will be my last comment. It's just what I love about this era is that you never know what's going to happen in a way that you just can't have exist in the quote unquote modern day DCU or present day timeline. Superman's not going to die. Batman's not going to die. And if he dies, someone will come. There's certain things that just aren't going to change. Like in the Legion, you could kill a character and they're gone. They're just like, they're stakes, more stakes than you would see in the present. And that really adds a lot of power to this run, and so unlike comics even of that time.
I think it's a good coda for this. It's a good
kill
finale.
them all. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, it is one of those things, like when they're separate and the stakes are different, right? And the Legion has had a long history of like surprise deaths that nobody saw coming, or just surprise changes. Like again, like Lightning Lass just or late last, sorry, just quitting, like
Right.
out of nowhere. And there's nothing really that leads up to it. She just kind of goes, no, I'm done. And then she's out. And, you didn't see that in a lot of other books. Like it would always be these big moments or this like, hey, this character or the result. And she's just like, Legion hurts people. I'm going home.
Yeah.
And we're on to the next characters, right?
Yep.
So
I think it's why you see like the absolute books and the ultimate versions really resonating with readers, because you don't know what's going to happen next. And there's no
Yeah.
set roadmap for these characters. And it's really cool. So I think the Legion has that as well.
all right. As we wrap this up, Jim, you've got some questions, right?
So, Alex, when we have guests on, we like to do the lightning lad round, where we just you a few just random questions, just to give the listeners an idea of what kind of stuff you like.
Okay.
All right. So, question number 1: favorite Legionnaire.
Favorite Legionnaire? I would say it's probably Shadowlass or Dream Girl.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. What was the last thing you listened to?
Last thing I listened to, my kids are really into Weird Al, so we've been listening to a lot of Weird Al, but also a lot of, I have this massive like Beatles playlist where it's just the entire discography on shuffle. So whenever I'm driving them around, that's what we listen to.
Nice, awesome. And what was the last thing you watched?
I am currently watching The Pit, which I didn't see when it started, but it feels very much like The Bear, but in an ER. And and the old man in me is like, oh, this was supposed to be an ER sequel, and the writer in me is like looking at the narrative stuff, but it doesn't really help my anxiety, I will say, but it's a great show.
Yeah, I mean, the Bear gets me all worked up just watching that.
Yeah, and that's the kitchen. You're only hurting food. This is like you see people like really.
Yeah. No, I did see an interview with Noah Wiley a few weeks ago, and it's very compelling. But I don't know if I'm ready to make the jump and watch that show yet.
It's a lot, yeah, and it ramps up as the season progresses. But it's great TV. So
yeah.
And that is also a really masterclass in like planting a subplot and having it resolved later in the season that I appreciated as like a mystery writer.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. So we have a few emails. We have a couple of them about the Superboy episode, and we actually received one about the animated series season 2 episode that we did last time. So first email comes from our friend Tim. He says thoughts about and inspired by your kick-ass episode on Superboy. That's the title of the email. So thank you, Tim. So he says, great episode on Superboy. Some thoughts. I love the angle of having LSH being integral to Clark becoming Superman. Adopting this mindset would be a great way for DC Comics to both boost their chances for long-term success and make DC have to steer the Legion directly into the Superman mythos instead of gatekeeping them. Interesting comment. And then Ken Shakespeare could be aboard Medicus 1 as an intern for Dr. Jim Oak. He wants to be a doctor, but occasionally gets dragged into superhero shenanigans. Honorary member? Or maybe Medicus 1 could have like a Pitt-inspired issue.
Not a bad idea, yeah. So you already got a good cast, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so let me see. Next one, we have our friend Todd Ramsey emails us. He says, I enjoyed your Superboy retrospective. To this day, I maintain that one of the failures of the Bendis Legion was not calling it Superboy in the Legion of Superheroes, because essentially he was the star of the series, and it would have set the expectation that the Legion was more of a supporting cast. That said, I don't think John is going to be the correct Superboy for the Legion, simply because there was a push to also call him Superman and treating him more as an adult and established hero. I too hope that Superboy Prime is not a member, because he's essentially a psychopath with no empathy. Putting him into the Legion would be the equivalent of when Earthman was put into the Legion, though Prime is much worse. Connor Kent is currently in outer space. Connor would be the most logical choice for that reason. Personally, I don't want to see another overpowered member, especially a male presenting one on the team. So interesting comments from Todd. Thank you, Todd. So Alex, what are your thoughts on Superboy Prime? I just gotta know.
I mean, I was at DC when Infinite Crisis was happening and Superboy Prime was really having his breakout. I always found him fascinating. I think he could be he can run the gamut. He could be very polarizing, very funny, very interesting. Yeah. I'm a sucker for a good redemption arc of a villain becoming a hero. So, and I trust in Josh, and I like what he's done with the character lately. That said, to me, the Legion is fine as part of Superman lore, but I don't think you have to have Superboy on the team. In fact, sometimes, for me, the best Legion stories don't involve Superboy at all. I mean, Superboy shows up in Great Darkness Saga, but very much as like the reinforcements, which is really cool. I like him as kind of the cameo queen showing up every now and again.
Yeah. Agreed.
I was actually thinking, with the movie coming out this summer, could it not be Supergirl? Like, and put her in the, like, because she's been a longtime Legion member as well. And like, again, like try to, marketing is part of this. Try to use that as a way to get more people and get more readers, to get more eyes on this. And I think because she is a teenager and she is they can play a little bit with the Brainiac 5 story. I mean, unless they keep writing Brainiac 5 as a jerk, which I can't. That's my own little.
And our final email is from our friend Matthew Elmsley from the Legion Abstract blog. And he says, my thoughts about the season overall. This is about the animated series season 2. He says, my thoughts about the season overall were that it had a lot of good stuff in it, but it was flawed in the large scale. Like there's a much told story about how between seasons, the network did some focus group testing with 8-year-old boys. And it came out of it with the mission of giving the show more cool powers, more cool costumes, and fewer girl characters. And that's what we got. I hated that aspect of it. Don't disagree with you there, Matthew. But the thing I liked about the Karate Kid episode is why do we think Superman wanted him on the team? My idea is, in between seasons, what has Superman done? He's joined the Justice League. And now he has the idea that the Legion needs its own Batman. And to Superman, the key to Batman is that he has no powers, but a lot of determination. The worst episode was the one with the stupid magic kid. Complete waste of our time. And he says Superman X did appear in comics once for one panel. He was on the last page of the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st Century, number 20, as part of the montage about the Legion's animated adventures beyond that comic book series. So we do have that. Jay, you were asking about that particular question.
But not in regular continuity, whatever that means.
Right, exactly.
Whatever that could be. So
I liked your comment. I guess it was, you said consistency, not continuity.
Yeah. What are the stories that resonate are the ones that really become the continuity anyway.
Yes.
So you know what I just realized? We did not mention for the entire talk about this run, the new Invisible Kid. How did we get through this without literally the most X-Men character that the Legion had in the 80s? Like he is the Claremont, like he's hitting every Claremont mark. He's got the white streak, just like Rogue. He's got the accent. He gets to throw in French words. Like he's the newcomer to the team, and somehow we missed that completely.
I thought it was well done. I really liked it, and I like that he's a legacy character to some degree, and it carries the weight of taking over this really important role, but is also a newbie, and his introduction to the lore was really well done. So good catch. I totally whiffed on that one.
I think that I was like, how did we miss this?
Yeah, and we got his sister, who ends up becoming a Legionnaire as well. So
it's almost like this run is worth maybe a couple episodes.
Yeah, I know.
Probably.
I know we actually were debating that, but I guess we're going to go into the Baxter one at some point here too.
Yeah.
No, those will be the emails. You forgot this. You forgot this.
How dare you? I'm sure we got some stuff wrong too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, our listeners, I'm sure, will tell us if we get anything wrong.
Don't CC me on those.
Right. So, okay. So let's wrap her up here. So, Alex, thanks again for joining us here. This has been a great discussion.
Yeah, it's been fun.
The best era of the Legion ever. So where can people find you?
You can, my website, alexsegura.com. I'm also on Bluesky and Instagram at Alex Segura Jr. on Instagram. On Bluesky, it's alexsegura.com. Yeah, those are the places. I have a Substack as well, which you can sign up for.
I was going to ask as well, is there something you've written that we should be looking for that's either coming out or that's out, like something that listeners should be checking?
Yes, I'm still co-writing the ongoing Dick Tracy series from Mad Cave. Issue 15 just came out. My Daredevil adult crime novel is hitting at the end of March 24th, and that is part of Marvel's crime line of novels. There's been a Jessica Jones book, mine's second, and there will be a Luke Cage book after mine. And if you are a fan of this era of the Legion, please check out The Forgotten Five, which is a Patreon comic we're serializing very much in conversation with Claremont X-Men, Levitz Legion, Love and Rockets. And it's about a bunch of teenagers who are cursed with new powers and have to struggle with that in addition to being teenagers. And we also tell the story of their kind of present day timeline, getting the band back together to fight this unseen evil. So it's by me and Sarah Century with art by Pat Kennedy, Dean Kotz, and more. So it's really us trying to do that kind of long form storytelling without worrying about, we only have 5 issues or a one shot, just kind of letting it roll. And so B plot and subplots and detours aplenty.
Nice.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was a blast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You were welcome at any time. You have an open seat at the table here, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Would love to be back. Thanks, guys.
So, and Jim, where can they find you? I beat you to it.
Yeah. Dang it. Okay. Well, okay. So I have my Legion Reviews website at jimboslegion.blogspot.com, where I try to post a comic a week that's somehow Legion related, but I am way behind on that particular goal. You can find me personally on Bluesky at jimbofett.bsky.social, on Reddit at jimbofett87, and on Discord as Jimbo Fett on the Legion Fan Club Discord, as well as the Certain Point of View Discord. How about you, Jay?
You can find my columns, my reviews at jmlonglivethelegion.blogspot.com. And I'm just starting to get into the flow of Retro Boot, and it's that nice jump between the modern stuff and then when Paul Levitz goes back. Although I think I'm about to get into Legion Academy, which I might be less excited about, but we'll see how it goes. I honestly, I have zero memory, so I just going by people going, good luck. You can find me on Bluesky at jmckernan.bsky.social. You can find me on Reddit and on Discord under the username Drake Burrows, and definitely check us out at the Legion fan board. And if you're not a member, all three of us are on there.
Yeah.
So you can send messages and make comments. Just reach out to Jim. And if you want to reach out to the podcast, our email address is longlivethelegion2025@gmail.com. Yeah, hopefully, as we keep going, that 2025 is just going to seem really funny. Like now that we're into the next year.
Yeah, I couldn't get just Long Live the Legion for the email, unfortunately. But you can also get to us on Bluesky at longlivelegion.bsky.social as well. So as always, feel free to give us a rating. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcatcher of choice. That really helps with helping you all find some of the content that we create. So again, thanks for listening.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're seeing our clips on Instagram, please like those. We are all over the place. And we do also have a Facebook page, right? We're
trying to get that up. The Facebook part of it is kind of weird because I don't know. So I'm still working on that one. Still working on that one. So, but yes, look for that sometime here soon. So awesome. So I guess we'll go ahead and shut down the mission monitor board for today. And then until next time, long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone?
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.